Why is there suffering in the world? It is a common belief within Christianity that in the beginning this world was devoid of suffering. But when Adam and Eve disobeyed God and ate from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, God changed His creation and added suffering to this world as a punishment for their disobedience. This view of suffering in the world appears to be based on a literal interpretation of the following passages from the book of Genesis. Unto the woman He said, I will greatly multiply thy sorrow and thy conception. In sorrow thou shalt bring forth children. And unto Adam He said, Because thou hast hearkened unto the voice of thy wife, and hast eaten of the tree of which I commanded thee, saying, Thou shalt not eat of it, cursed is the ground for thy sake. In sorrow shalt thou eat of it all the days of thy life. In the sweat of thy face shalt thou eat bread, till thou returneth unto the ground, for out of it wast thou taken, for dust thou art, and unto dust shalt thou return. And indeed, the Catholic Encyclopedia specifically asserts that suffering is the penalty of sin. While indeed following God's will, both individually and collectively, would significantly reduce suffering in the world, the Bahá'í Teachings do not interpret the story of Adam and Eve literally, but rather point out that a certain amount of suffering is naturally inherent in having a physical body and living temporarily in a physical world. In the words of ABDU'L-BAHÁ, certain matters are subject to the free will of man, such as acting with justice and fairness, or injustice and iniquity. In other words, the choice of good or evil actions. It is clear and evident that the will of man figures greatly in these actions, but there are certain matters where man is forced and compelled, such as sleep, death, sickness, failing powers, misfortune, and material loss. These are not subject to the will of man, and he is not accountable for them, for he is compelled to endure them. Further revelation of the Word of God has revealed that we human beings have a dual nature, both of which come into being at conception. A physical body that is subject to physical suffering, but is created to be mortal, so that suffering is temporary, and a soul that is totally spiritual in nature and is created to be immortal. It also reveals that the purpose of having to endure suffering in this physical world is to prepare us spiritually for our birth into the next totally spiritual world, which we enter when our physical bodies die. In the words of ABDU'L-BAHÁ, those who suffer most attain to the greatest perfection. Within that context, let's explore the question: in what way does suffering help us to grow spiritually in preparation for our third birth? Our first birth, of course, was when we were born out of our mother's womb into this world. Our second birth was when we became spiritually awakened through the power of the Word of God. And our third birth into the next totally spiritual world will occur when our physical bodies die and return to dust. The value of suffering. God alone orders all things and is all-powerful. Why then does He send trials to His servants? The trials of man are of two kinds. A, the consequence of his own actions. If a man eats too much, he ruins his digestion. If he takes poison, he becomes ill or dies. If a person gambles, he'll lose his money. If he drinks too much, he will lose his equilibrium. All these sufferings are caused by man himself. It is quite clear, therefore, that certain sorrows are the result of our own deeds. B. Other sufferings there are which come upon the faithful of God. Consider the great sorrows endured by Christ and His apostles. Those who suffer most attain to the greatest perfection. Those who declare a wish to suffer much for Christ's sake must prove their sincerity. Those who proclaim their longing to make great sacrifices can only prove their truth by their deeds. Job proved the fidelity of his love for God by being faithful through his great adversity as well as during the prosperity of his life. The apostles of Christ, who steadfastly bore all their trials and sufferings, did they not prove their faithfulness? Was not their endurance the best proof? These griefs are now ended. Caiaphas lived a comfortable and happy life, while Peter's life was full of sorrow and trial. Which of these two is more enviable? Assuredly, we should choose the present state of Peter, for he possesses immortal life, whilst Caiaphas has won eternal shame. The trials of Peter tested his fidelity. Tests are benefits from God, for which we should thank Him. Grief and sorrow do not come to us by chance. They are sent to us by the divine mercy for our own perfecting. While man is happy, he may forget his God, but when grief comes and sorrows overwhelm him, then he will remember his Father who is in heaven and who is able to deliver him from his humiliations. Men who suffer not attain no perfection. The plant most pruned by the gardeners is that one which when summer comes will have the most beautiful blossoms and the most abundant fruit. The laborer cuts up the earth with his plow, and from the earth comes the rich and plentiful harvest. The more a man is chastened, the greater is the harvest of spiritual virtues shown forth by him. A soldier is no good general until he has been in the front of the fiercest battle and has received the deepest wounds. The prayer of the prophets of God has always been, and still is, O God, I long to lay down my life in the path to Thee. I desire to shed my blood for Thee, and to make the supreme sacrifice. In the words of Jesus Christ, blessed are they that are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are ye, when men shall revile you and persecute you, and shall say all manner of evil against you falsely for my sake. Rejoice and be exceedingly glad, for great is your reward in heaven. For so persecuted they the prophets which were before you. And again, and he that taketh not his cross and followeth after me is not worthy of me. He that findeth his life shall lose it, and he that loseth his life for my sake shall find it. To the loyal soul, a test is but God's grace and favor. For the valiant doth joyously press forward to the furious battle on the field of anguish, when the coward, whimpering with fright, will tremble and shake. So too the proficient student, who hath with great competence mastered his subjects and committed them to memory, will happily exhibit his skills before his examiners on the day of his tests. So too will solid gold wondrously gleam and shine out in the assayer's fire. It is clear, then, that tests and trials are for the sanctified souls but God's bounty and grace, while to the weak they are calamity, unexpected and sudden. These tests, even as thou didst write, do but cleanse the spotting of self from off the mirror of the heart, till the Sun of Truth can cast its rays thereon. For there is no veil more obstructive than the self. And however tenuous that veil may be, at the last it will completely shut a person out and deprive him of his portion of eternal grace. One of the requisites of true love is willingness to bear every suffering and tribulation, that hath occurred in the past or may occur in the future. The purpose is to enable you to know that one of the tenets of those that thirst after him, and the highest aspiration of such as long to behold his face, is to endure hardship, to submit to trials and martyrdom in the path of the Lord of grace. Therefore it behoveth you to render thanks unto God for the bounty of having drunk your fill from this draught, and for having tasted deadly poison in the path of the Beloved. Indeed, far from being poison, this is pure honey and sugar. And far from being bitter in taste, this is the essence of sweetness. Oh, how eager am I to bear affliction in the path of God. Oh, what a great joy to suffer hardship for his love. Oh, how blessed the man who tasteth the bitterness of woe, and how well is it with him who is swept into the ocean of tribulation in his eagerness to attain the presence of God. It behoveth you to offer thanksgiving at every moment, inasmuch as ye became the target of atrocities in the path of divine guidance, and were exposed to grievous oppressions for the sake of the love ye cherish for the Almighty. In truth, those that are guided solely by their reason would be unable to perceive the sweetness of this cup. But the ardent lovers will be overjoyed and enraptured by the holy ecstasy which this wondrous draught doth produce. Every discerning observer who hath gazed upon the countenance of that graceful Beloved was prompted to lay down his life as a martyr, and every receptive ear which hath hearkened to that celestial melody suffered its listener to become so enravished with joy as to offer up himself without hesitation as a sacrifice. The moth which is animated by love will burn its wings as it fluttereth around the lamp of God, and the phoenix of tender affection will be set ablaze by the fire of ardent desire. No unfamiliar bird can partake of the heat of this fire, nor can the fowls that dwell upon the dust plunge forth into this heavenly ocean. However, praise be to God, ye are the leviathans of this ocean, the birds of this pasture, the moths of this lamp, the nightingales of this meadow. And upon you rest the glory of the most glorious.